Sumit Nagal scripted all kinds of history when he defeated Alexander Bublik in the first round of the Australian Open Grand Slam. Why? Because Nagal has become the first Indian player, the first Indian male player since in 35 years to have actually beaten a seeded player in a Grand Slam singles draw. That is phenomenal, whichever way you look at it. But it's also worth noting that Nagal, in recent times, there have been a lot of stories out there about him, and more often than not, it does paint a slightly sorry picture, especially when you consider that Sumit Nagal is India's first, or rather highest ranked men's singles tennis player. You remember a few months back there were stories about him struggling for funds and sponsors, and just in a few short months, the turnaround that he's achieved at this point is nothing short of remarkable. To go from there to be not only competing in but winning matches in a Grand Slam singles, it's phenomenal whichever way you look at it. But what we'll do in this video is we'll quickly recap that, and it's important to start at the beginning when it comes to Sumit Nagal, because again, he's someone who comes from very humble beginnings. He was born in the town of Jhajjar in Haryana, and in fact, were it not for the early days backing that he got from Mahesh Bhupati, who at that point had opened a tennis academy in Bangalore, there is a very good chance that he would have seen no Sumit Nagal in the men's tennis scene, because his parents would not have been able to afford to fund his career. Now, tennis, as we'll discover in this video, is a very costly sport, even though the rewards, well, they're great, but the risks and the challenges and the pitfalls that come along with it does make it a very tough sport to sustain itself in. Unless you are, of course, in the top 50 ranked players of the world, then you are pretty much sorted for the most part. However, Sumit Nagal's ranking is 137 at this point in time, which means he comes in that list of players who are more often than not scrapping for, let's say, whatever it is that they can make, both monetarily and in terms of ranking points, to ensure that their rise up the ATP rankings goes smoothly. Now, of course, early days, as I said, definitely comes from a family of humble means, has since then gone on to establish himself rather well given all those circumstances. But just a few months back, you'd remember there was an interview that he had done wherein he revealed that he didn't have any major sponsors and that he was in fact only living with 900 euros in his bank account. 900 euros with the current exchange rate would be about 80,000 rupees. That's not a lot of money, especially in a sport which requires you to pretty much self-fund. You need all of the money that you can to ensure that you can travel, to ensure that you can have your stays and all of those things. You need to be paying your coaching staff, all of that stuff. It's an expensive sport, and to do that without any sponsors, that is a massive thing whichever way you look at it. Then on top of that, despite the fact that he did end up getting some sponsorship, there were issues he ran into where he was denied an Australian Open wild card and therefore had to go through the qualifiers, win 3 back-to-back qualifiers, and then went on to become the first Indian since 1989 to beat a seeded player in a major slam. Again, if you go over that chronology, it's massively remarkable, because again, with no sponsors and only 900 euros in his bank account, he gave an interview to a news agency, and it seemed like that was as far as rock bottom as he could go. But that interview generated a lot of sympathy and even outrage that India's highest ranked tennis player could be in such a situation is in fact a failure of the Indian sporting system as well. From there, he got sponsors but ran into a bit of an issue where he could have actually qualified for the main draw of the Grand Slam Australian Open directly. Why? Because there are wildcards that are issued by the organizers of the Grand Slam. Now, the Australian Open does have one particular wildcard reserved for the Asia Pacific region, and if AajTak had nominated Sumit Nagal's name for that, there was every chance he would have gotten that wildcard because he has a superior ranking. Now, there was every chance he could have gotten that wildcard and avoided the qualifiers. Why was that not given to him, that wildcard? Because the AajTak, which is All India Tennis Association, chose not to nominate him for that. The reason being that he chose to pull out of a Davis Cup tie that will be taking place against Pakistan. The tie will be taking place in February, but to give you a bit of context, Davis Cup is not something that a lot of top players will more often than not take seriously, at least not in today's day and age. It's not something that top players will play in unless their countries make it to the later stages. There is simply not that much money involved, and more importantly, the ranking points you have to gain on the ATP tours, whether it be the challengers, whether it be the main tours, would be far more significant than playing in the Davis Cup. That's why he turned it down, and this was the ITA's way of getting back at him. So because of that, he had to take the hard way, won 3 qualifying matches without dropping a set, I may add, and thereafter has gone on to win this particular game. But this match, as I said, when you're talking about him overcoming the odds, one of the main things that we talked about was this financial situation. Well, the Australian Open might actually aid him financially as well, because the way tennis's, let's say, money, or rather the prize money structure is, the further you make it in the tournament, the better is the amount of money that you will be earning from the Grand Slam. So as we mentioned before, in September 2023, he had done that interview where he said, only got 900 euros in my bank account. But as of now, at this point in time, even if he loses in the second round of the Australian Open, he will be banking rupees 1.01 crores. That is how much money he's said to be earning as a guaranteed figure, no matter where it is that he makes it thereafter. And again, this is this 1.01 crore is because that is the payout given to the loser of the second round. If suppose he qualifies for the third round and then ends up losing, then he gets rupees 1.43 crores, which is a pretty big sum. Of course, it's a pretty big sum in let's say Indian terms. Of course, in the larger global scheme of things, that's not a ton of money to be made, but it's a better situation than he finds himself in a few months back. And the sport of tennis is such, it's very dog eat dog. You need to be funding your own career, but you cannot do that unless you're actually winning. So it's a vicious cycle, really. And Nagal, truth be told, could be in a better situation if he can make it to round 3, because again, 1.43 crores is what he'll bank, and then that is money that he can reinvest, whether it be for ensuring that his coaching staff gets better paid. Maybe he can add a coach or two, ensure that he travels to a few more tournaments. If he travels to a few more tournaments and does well over there, that gives him a boost in his rankings, which then makes it easier for him to potentially qualify for subsequent Grand Slams and make more money. So it's definitely cyclical in that regard. Of course, it's still early days, but the fact that Nagal could end up winning even this match was in itself massive, because again, whilst a lot of you might not see Alexander Bublik as being some sort of a major threat, the fact is that in pure tennis terms, he was head and shoulders above Nagal. Bublik has won 3 ATP singles titles and is consistently making it into the second, third, fourth rounds of Grand Slam. So that is far better than what Nagal was doing, because again, Nagal after 2021 hadn't played in the main draw of a Grand Slam. It's after 3 years that he is going to be playing a main draw in the Australian Open. Remember, 2021 he had played, and now 3 years, 2024, he made it to that. But again, the amount of adversity he'll have to overcome to even make it there, it's pretty good. It's full testament, really, and full marks to him as a character and as a person, that he could overcome that and is now experiencing success. You can only hope he gets far more success than this on the tennis court. It's not an easy sport, it's a ruthless sport, but if Nagal continues to play this way, then maybe there are better things to come. Not necessarily in Grand Slams, but you could potentially see him do better in ATP level events. And then potentially, if his ranking gets better, his form continues to stay the same way, you can at least hope to see him regularly compete in and be competitive in Grand Slams. It's a baby step for Indian tennis, because again, when it comes to Indian tennis, we've had success in doubles, but singles success has been elusive for decades at this point. And Nagal at this point is probably the most successful player in over a decade, because again, the last time, he's in fact only the second Indian player in a 10-year span to have actually made it to round 2. Before him, the last person to do it was him in 2020, and before that, the last male tennis player to make it to the second round in a Grand Slam was Somdev Devarman all the way back in 2013. So there's definitely been a void. One hopes that Nagal can step up and fill that void. He doesn't need to be a Grand Slam winner to do that, just needs to keep beating the odds the way he has done and consistently compete at the top level tournaments. That in itself will be a big win for tennis in the country of India. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you can let us know by liking it, sharing it with your friends, subscribing to the channel. Also tap that bell icon and leave us a comment. Share your congratulatory thoughts for Sumit Nagal, and go ahead and follow us also. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Don't forget to download the SportsTech app, and if you're already on the channel, well, go right ahead, check out some other videos we've done as well. For now though, from my side, it's goodbye.